My name is Ronald Dillard Jr., and I'm a writer, director, actor, and producer. I have been acting since I was 12 years old, and everything that I do spawned from my love of acting. I've been writing since high school, I've been directing since college, and I've been producing independently since 2008. My background is theater. I grew up in the theater, so I come back from not having microphones, having to enunciate and articulate, being in the theater and raising your voice so they can hear you in the back, all the way in the back. And my first two productions were actually theater productions that I wrote, produced, directed, and also acted in it. Because being in Richmond, Virginia, they were doing a lot of different productions that were based in the 1800s, and I felt like those stories were being well represented. But I wanted to see more about stories about today, about who we are, why we do some of the things that we do. And what's happened is I have a trend now of tackling some very, very tough subject matters. My first play was called I Deserve Better. It dealt with domestic violence. Now, while I have not been a victim or have seen domestic violence growing up, it became when I was back in the middle school. I was on a school bus, and I remember this kid asked this girl for her number, and she didn't want to give it to him, and he basically lunged at her like that. And I didn't understand where that aggression came from, and that was the spawn of it. And when I was in high school, I started writing this play called "What Kind of Love Is This," which eventually became "I Deserve Better." And the research that I found out is that at the time, 70% of men who abuse women saw it growing up from someone. And it was just really wanting to tackle exactly what was behind that aggressor. And I came up with a production that focused on three things. Number one, the perspective of the abused, then also the perspective of the abuser, whether right or wrong. I do feel like it's important, if you can understand where a person does a particular thing, you can kind of hopefully understand a way to probably help them. And then there was a third perspective, which was the father trying to discipline his son, which his son feels like is very, very insulting because he taught his son how to be that way. So that's kind of how I got started and kind of how I kicked off producing specifically independently.
Thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
So, where exactly were you born? Do you want to take us a little bit to your background, where you grew up? We're interested in your story,
Okay.
and like, where did you grow up in your young adolescent years?
Yes, I'm born and raised in Petersburg, Virginia. I still reside in Virginia. Now, Petersburg, Virginia is the home of NBA great legend Moses Malone, an actor named Blair Underwood, a NBA basketball player by the name of Frank Mason, also a R&B singer named Trey Songz. All of these individuals resided and were born and bred in Petersburg, Virginia. Born in Petersburg, went to Petersburg High School, graduated from Petersburg High School, and lived there up until about 2004 when I moved to Richmond, Virginia, which is where I currently reside right now. And in my childhood, I grew up with knowing who my father was, but he was there, but he wasn't there. I have an older brother and a younger sister, and a very, very strong mother. My mother, she actually worked 32 years in the Department of Corrections, DOC. And I'm actually developing a television show inspired by her life and kind of what she went through, because she's someone who, the way her focus was to have these responsibilities and to be so focused and to be so devoted to her family, is truly inspiring. The love that she gave us and the lessons that she taught us have just, you just can't forget those. And just her dedication and all that she sacrificed for, I could never repay her, for everything that she's done for me, and I think for us as a family as well.
Thank you so much for that. There is something that touched me a little bit when you were doing the explanation just now. And of course, it's up to you. I'm just going to ask you anyway because I just do questioning.
Okay. Okay.
All right. You say your father was there, but he wasn't there.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that my father wasn't interested in being a father. I mean, he was somebody who was there, he was working, he was at the house, but didn't particularly spend a lot of time. I mean, for example, he loved fishing. I never was into fishing, so I would never really go with him. I mean, there were times he would take me out, but it wasn't a situation where he would sit down and have conversations, maybe particular time. See, one of the things that our mother did was she spent time with us collectively as a group, and she would spend time with us individually. She would do things that we were interested in, or she would make sure it was a group. She did everything she could. She had individual talks with us. She gave us all the time that she could, which was more than enough. Because in that situation, a lot of times she had to be at work, but she still made time. And this is her going back to school. It took her 20 years to finish school, working full time in Department of Corrections, and making time to spend time with us collectively as children and individually. I mean, again, what she did, but my father, he just wasn't interested in it. I don't have a lot of bad things to say about him because he just pretty much left me alone. didn't yell at me, did not abuse me, didn't he just wasn't there. He just was interested in on his off time. He was interested in kind of being in the streets. Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. At least that is a human part of the person
Yeah.
behind the camera. That is important for us. Now, when you were growing up, I'm still like sort of there. What kind of conversations sort of dominate your time? Like, because now we are coming to understand
Mhm.
why are you doing what you are doing. So I'm trying to like ask,
Yeah.
what were the kind of conversation that occupy your mind with your friends? What did
Mhm.
you talk about? What were the things that you love to talk about that you spend your time on with your friends?
Well, with my friends talking about, for them, it was mostly always, kind of, it was music and it was sports and occasionally it was movies. But I have to say that what inspired me, as far as from an artistic perspective, is watching television, watching movies. My mother and I, our biggest bond has always been watching television shows or watching films and then having discussion about them. One of the things that she did that I really appreciate, she would show us some tough movies. It would be supervised, like A Boys in the Hood or Men's Society. She took us to the movie to see Malcolm X, and she would show us these hard-hitting movies as children, and then she would have a conversation with us. So of course, if you see something that was, if you saw vulgarity, or if you saw something that was kind of on the edge, she would let us know. She would explain it to us, also let us know that was not acceptable. But she would also have a conversation for us to think about why certain things happen. Like if you take the movie Juice, for example, okay, where did situations go wrong? How did it get to this situation? What would you do in that situation? Because the fact that she worked at the Department of Corrections, and she was saying, okay, I don't want my children ever to wind up here, and I know how serious this is. And 15 seconds of you losing your temper for a second could cost you 15 years. So it was always important for her to impress upon that on us. So watching these different movies and even going back and watching things like Beverly Hills Cop and just seeing Eddie Murphy, or Trading Places, or just seeing the Toy Soldiers, or all of these different films just had an effect on me. Another reason is because I was someone who was pretty much of had a shy nature. So it made more sense trying to be a character, being someone else, than being myself. Because I still didn't know who I was. Hadn't developed particular personality. I mean, I don't really feel like I could put a joke together until I got to high school. So when I saw films specifically and saw these characters, or I saw different cartoons and I saw all of these different vibing characters, it gave me a way of an escape. And I think that's kind of how I started making the correlation. So once I understood that acting was where it was what they were doing, that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I think that was the motivation behind it.
That's very interesting. In fact, I was like thinking in my mind that I was going to ask you,
Mhm.
when was the moment you actually realized that film was your thing? Because now you actually have already explained that now. That is very important.
Mhm.
That moment, that is very clear, very important. Okay, now I'm curious about another thing before we go into what you specifically do in terms of maybe naming your films just now.
Mhm.
Um, is there a message that run across your film? Is there something that you want to communicate out to the people through your storytelling, using film, using the visual representation as it were?
It's interesting because I know that when it comes to the television shows that I've developed, it's kind of different from my films. My films have been an exploration. I write things that fascinate me. And being independent, I've written stories that fascinate me. And the overall theme is I want people to be able to take a look at it and basically think about it for themselves. I want them to take a look at themselves. See, the thing is this, I believe it is better to learn a lesson from a fictional character that hopefully can basically breathe uh, new life into you. For example, I Deserve Better is about domestic violence, and the best compliment I got on that play was there was a couple who got the DVD and they watched it, and the husband looked at it and was like, "Oh my God, this guy is terrible. Was I anything like that?" And his wife looked at him and says, "You were just like that," because he was, but he had made a transition to the point where he couldn't even recognize himself from what he used to be. And I don't know if that could have, been any more clear. So I want things that are going to, for my films, I want them to draw conversation. I want people to take a look at themselves in a situation where in a non-judgmental way. I want them to take in the production and then think about it. What does this mean to me?